Thank you very much, everyone. I wish we were sitting in a great big room together so that we could see each other. I do want you to know how happy I am to be able to talk with you about this topic because you are the people who can do something with it. And I really hope that you do. So what we're going to cover today is, first we're going to take a look at a formula for strategic success. Then we're going to talk about 4 essential factors of employee engagement and how to do them. I think sometimes we know what needs to happen, but we don't always know how to make it happen. And then, Q&A. So this formula for strategic success, I want to talk about something called execution muscle. What does that mean? That means getting it done right, getting it done on time or earlier than promised, getting it done better than the competition, profitably. And so why am I talking about this in a session on employee engagement? Well, I think we've all been exposed to information about how important employee engagement is and even the financial impact the level of engagement has on a company's bottom line. And that is really the truth. In fact, if I wanted to predict how my company is going to be doing over the next 12 months, all I would need to do was look at the level of engagement of our employees, and that would pretty much tell me. I mean, assuming that you have a product and or a service that is meeting the needs of your customers and that it's priced correctly. So we've got to make our strategic plan come alive. And having a good plan is essential, but it's really only half the battle. We've got to execute the plan. And you've probably been as frustrated as I've seen so many people be at times when you've got a really good plan and it ain't happening. You know, people are lagging. They're coming to you with a list of really good excuses and reasons why they're missing deadlines or why something isn't working. And yet you thought everybody was in complete agreement and set to go. So I want to talk about how do we create execution muscle? Well, I think there are 2 things. Engagement plus inclusion equals execution muscle. So the simplest definition of employee engagement is the emotional commitment that the employee has to the organization and its goals. And inclusion is just as important, that people feel they have a place at the table, that they are being heard, that they are being seen, that they are valued. They want to feel that they are members, that they belong to a community or a tribe. And engagement and inclusion are practices. And we get really good at what we practice every day. And if we don't practice it every day, then we don't develop the skill. So a martial arts sensei once said, you are always practicing something. The question is, what are you practicing? So where does conversation come into employee engagement? I love this quote from Seth Godin in his book, Tribes. A tribe is a group of people connected to one another, connected to a leader, and connected to an idea. For millions of years, human beings have been part of one tribe or another. A group needs only 2 things to be a tribe: a shared interest and a way to communicate. And I see it that way too. In fact, I think that conversations are the single most powerful tool you have for engaging people, for including people, and building execution muscle, and yet it is the most overlooked. And of course, Fierce has aimed to change that over the last 12 years, and I think we're making some excellent progress. So I want to share with you an idea. And the idea, if you've read either of my books, Fierce Conversations or Fierce Leadership, you may recall that years ago when I had been running think tanks for CEOs and had had well over 10,000 hours of conversations with them individually or when they were together as a group, I was reading Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises, in which a character is asked, how did you go bankrupt? And he responds, gradually, then suddenly. And when I read that, I laughed, and I had what my niece calls an apostrophe. She means epiphanies, but she calls them apostrophes. And my apostrophe was that our careers and our companies and our relationships, and indeed our very lives, succeed or fail gradually, then suddenly, one conversation at a time. So when you think about conversations, they can either invite us to collaborate and partner with one another, or they can add concertina wire between the walls of well-defended fiefdoms. They can encourage us, or they can shut us down. They can inspire and engage and include us, or they can bore us out of our minds. And it's very clear to me after all these years that what gets talked about in a company, how it gets talked about, and just as important, who is invited to the conversation determines what is going to happen, and equally what is not going to happen. So this first factor that I think is incredibly important regarding employee engagement is inclusion. And it's the one where I think we forget, we miss out. Years ago, I was working alongside Madeleine Albright, and we were doing a session for a large room full of women who were involved in politics in some fashion. And during the Q&A session, someone asked Madeleine Albright, if you could advise everybody on the planet, but you could only give them one piece of advice, having been Secretary of State, what would you advise them? And she said, I would advise them that what matters anywhere matters everywhere. And I was really struck by that. Of course, I think she was talking about what matters anywhere on the planet really matters everywhere on the planet. And I took it further. What matters to any member of a family matters to every member of the family. What matters in any area of an organization matters or should matter to every other part of that organization. And that's why the very first conversational model that we teach our clients is called the beach ball model, where you're picturing your organization as if it's a giant beach ball. And every single person in the organization is standing on a different colored stripe and is experiencing that stripe from that perspective. So if you're on the blue stripe, you have blue thoughts, you have a drawer full of blue papers, you tend to make blue decisions. And might those blue decisions be spectacular? Yes, they might. And they might also be a little short of brilliant because you don't have access to and can't even see from where you're standing on the beach ball the orange perspective or the purple perspective. So this model is based on the way that I used to conduct the CEO think tanks, where someone comes to the group and is very thoughtful about, and in your case, those of you who are listening to this, depending on the topic, whose perspective would be very useful, in fact, very important for you to have in the room as you talk about this. So not just the usual suspects, the leadership team, but also the people that are going to be affected by whatever decisions you make, the people who are going to need to execute the decisions that you make, maybe even some completely lone wolf outside who you think this is just an interesting person who might have something of value to share with us. And you get all of those people in the room, and the person who's putting the topic on the table says, here's the topic. And they walk through a form that they have filled out ahead of time that says, here's the topic. This is why it is important. Here's what is going on currently around this topic. If nothing changes, here's what's likely to occur. Here's what we've done so far around this topic. Here are the ideal outcomes that we have in mind when we're on the other side of this and have made decisions and executed it. Here are the options I'm currently considering And if I had to make a decision right now with nobody's input, this is the option I would choose for these reasons. Now, your value in this meeting is to tell me what I am missing from where you sit. You know, what is your perspective on this? Because there are always multiple competing perspectives on any issue. And someone who's really good at this actually is Robert Redford, of all people, of all wonderful people, someone I always wanted to meet. And when he pulls a meeting together, the cast of characters at the table is usually quite extraordinary and unexpected. And he does say to them, I want to be different when this meeting is over. I'm inviting you to influence me. Well, no wonder people would follow him to the ends of the earth. I mean, wouldn't you want to be in a room where maybe your boss or the leader or simply a colleague says, I'm inviting you to influence me. I really hope to be different when this conversation is over. And so everyone is heard. And you see in this diagram the dotted line person, that's the person who often comes to meetings and doesn't say anything or doesn't say much or says, well, I don't have anything to add, or, well, I agree with Tracy or whatever. And that person really needs to be confronted very respectfully about this. So, you know, if you're running that meeting, you need to call on every single person. What do you think? You know, what's your perspective on this? What do you think we should do? And if somebody says, I don't know, then you need to say, well, what would it be if you did know? And then let silence do the heavy lifting. And certainly that person will squirm, but eventually they'll say something. Or if they say, I don't really have anything to add, you need to say, well, what would you add if you did have something to add? So people learn very quickly that when I come to a beach ball meeting, I am going to be required to participate fully, including giving my viewpoint. And the way the meeting concludes is after everybody has had something to say, then the leader says, I want you to take a moment and write down, given everything we've just explored together, if you could give me one bit of advice, what would that advice be? Just one or two sentences, and then I want you to sign it, and we're going to read them, and I'll collect them. And that's what you do. You just go around and you hear from each person. No more discussion, just thank you, thank you, thank you. Collect them, and now you've got all of the suggestions from all of the people in the room, and you can make your decision being very well informed. These are such powerful meetings. The outcomes are, well, they're remarkable. For one thing, you will deepen yours and others' understanding of and appreciation for differing, often competing views of reality. You will also structure high levels of alignment and collaboration and partnership and engagement, not only within your own team, but across the organization. You know, when we have a meeting here to talk about a new workshop that we're developing, we also have somebody from marketing, somebody from business development, somebody from who designs all of our beautiful work. And we want everybody there because you just never know where the best ideas are going to come from. And finally, and very importantly, you will make the best possible decisions for your organization. This is really key because a fierce leader's goal is to get it right for the organization, not to be right. And I have had enough humbling moments where I thought I had a brilliant idea and it turned out to be not so brilliant, and other people built on it and turned it into something that was truly extraordinary. So a second idea is courtesy of David White, who described a young man who was newly married and was often frustrated and perplexed because his lovely new bride insisted on appearing before his face on a regular basis, wanting to talk yet again about the relationship and the quality of their relationship, and he wondered, why are we having this conversation again? Could we not just have one huge conversation about our relationship and then coast for a year? But here she is again, and David said, you know, long about age 42, if he's been paying attention, it dawns on him this ongoing, robust conversation that I have been having with my wife is not about the relationship. The conversation is the relationship. And that really struck me and explained so much. I wish that I'd been able to put that together in my own head long before I heard it from David. But it's one of those ideas I can never, ever pretend that I don't know. So if this does anything for you, if you think there might be something to this idea that the conversation is the relationship, then if the conversation stops, well, you can do the math. Or if you and I add yet another topic to the list of things we just can't talk about, then all of the possibilities for that relationship become smaller and smaller. In fact, all the possibilities for the individuals become smaller. So let's take it a step further. The conversation is the relationship, and our most valuable currency is not our IQ, it's not money, it's not our ability to speak in fluent three-letter acronyms, it's not our ability to write code. Our most valuable currency is relationship. It is emotional capital. And this is not just a sentiment on my part. Several years ago, Daniel Kahneman, who is a psychologist at Princeton, received the Nobel Prize for economics because of his discovery that people make decisions and act first for emotional reasons, second for rational reasons. So people, that would be you and me, human beings. This is not a girl thing. This is a human being thing. And that's what Kahneman's studies proved. So why would it win the Nobel Prize for economics? Because the implications are pretty stunning. Simple example, if a company has a relationship with its employees based primarily on exchange of time and talent for a paycheck, then that company will become a source for headhunters rather than a destination. People will not be particularly happy there because most people want to work in some company that is meaningful alongside people for whom they have genuine affection and respect. By the same token, if a company's relationship with its clients is based primarily on price, that could not be a more vulnerable position because all your competition has to do is offer something similar, or they might even claim that it's better for less money, and all those loyal customers are gone. So we've got to have something much more important than time and talent and good pricing. In fact, what I have been telling people for the last several years, especially, well, really everybody, I was going to say leaders, but really everybody, because I believe that leadership is a behavior, not necessarily a title. I know leaders who have the title who couldn't lead their way out of a paper bag, and I know people who don't have the title leader and are absolutely leaders wherever they are every day, and it's very plain to see for everyone. So if you want to become a great leader, you must gain the capacity to connect with your colleagues and your clients at a deep level or lower your aim. So connection. I feel that human connectivity is the next frontier for exponential growth, whether it's for an individual or for an organization, and it's the only sustainable competitive edge. So this differentiates you as a person, you as an organization, from everybody else. The level of connection you have with one another internally and with your customers externally. And you can see that in all of the emerging commercials that have happened over the years. The market, the advertising industry is onto this. They're always looking for that emotional connection. So just a couple of quotes to whet your appetite from the Dalai Lama. Our ancient experience confirms at every point that everything is linked together, everything is inseparable. Herman Melville, we cannot live only for ourselves. 1,000 fibers connect us with our fellow men, and among those fibers, as sympathetic threads, our actions run as causes and they come back to us as effects. You know, even the quantum physicists know that the mere presence of someone in a laboratory affects the outcome of an experiment. So when you walk into the room, you have an effect on everyone, and there's either a good connection or there's a lack of connection. And a final quote on this is, people cannot be just tied together. They have to connect. Otherwise, they'll find themselves bound head and foot. So, our factor is connection. How can we connect at a deep level with people? How do we do that? Well, let me give you some ideas. One of the things that I wrote about in Fierce Leadership as one of the worst best practices was hiring primarily for smarts. I'm not suggesting we hire for stupid. We do need smarts. We want all the smarts, all the great healthy brain cells we can get, and that's not enough. We have to have the person who can connect with their colleagues and potentially with customers at that deeper level in order for them to succeed and for their team and their organization to succeed. So, some people call this emotional intelligence. I think it's far more than that. It's an awareness. And in our trainings, we teach attendees how to have conversations that connect at a very, very deep level. And I'll walk you through one of those in just a minute, briefly. Secondly, we've got to, in every single conversation that we have, whether it's in a meeting with a whole bunch of people, whether it's one-on-one, whether it's face-to-face, whether it is on the phone, even if it's in an email exchange, be here in this conversation, this exchange, prepared to be nowhere else. There have been lots of articles about how multitasking is not all it's cracked up to be. And certainly, if you want to connect with someone at a deep level, you will fail over and over and over again if you are distracted when you are talking with them or engaging with them in some way. Because we know it. We know when someone's actually here or floating around elsewhere, either thinking about something that happened earlier in the day or something that's coming up in the day. We know it. So just to practice being here prepared to be nowhere else, giving someone your pure attention, it's one of the greatest gifts we can give another person. Also, stop talking. Start asking. There are people in everybody's world who are so filled with hubris or the misguided belief that the best way that they can help is by giving advice. Here's what I think you should do. Instead, stop talking and start asking, because too often we jump in with advice when we don't even understand really what the issue is. And that is why we teach everyone how to have what we call a mineral rights conversation, in which we are mining for clarity, for deeper understanding, and for impetus for action. Because I don't know about you, but I don't want to have the same conversation about an issue over and over and over again with someone. I really want to have one powerful conversation that is going to give them such clarity and such impetus for action that the next conversation will be about, okay, what happened, how did it go, what's next? So mineral rights, asking someone, given everything that's on your plate, everything that has your name on it, what is the most important thing that you and I should be talking about today? That is just in of itself is a gift. Because too often we go into a meeting with someone, whether it's a client or a colleague or a direct report, and we have our agenda. I want to talk to you about such and such and such and such. And we go right down our agenda, and we may not have noticed that this person has something else going on in their workspace or their personal life that is truly a stumbling block for them, or is taking up a lot of their thought and a lot of their energy and a lot of their emotions. And we need to say, tell me about this, tell me more, say more about that. What results is this currently producing? Say more. What else? What else? How is this affecting you? Say more about that. And we're just asking. Then, okay, if nothing changes, what's likely to occur? What else? What else? What else? If nothing changes around this within the next 6 months to a year, how will this have impacted you? When you describe this possible scenario, what do you feel? And very often people will say, well, it's frustrating, and we let them off the hook. That's when you want to say, talk about that frustration. Tell me what's going on. And let them get in touch with whatever heat they have around an issue. It's emotion that gives the lit match something to ignite. And without emotion, we can stay in our head. We can dissect an issue all day long. And if we've never gotten in touch with the fact, I do have some emotion on this. I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I'm afraid, I'm worried, I'm stressed, I'm whatever it is, then we're not necessarily in any danger of taking any action. So we want to get to the emotion. Then we want to say, all right, what did you bring to the party? Where's your DNA on this? This is the accountability part of it. And we can ask this not in a blaming way, but just I'm really curious, is what do you notice that you contributed to this situation being the way it is? And then we don't beat them up about it. We don't say, yes, and let me add to your list. We just say, is there anything else? Is there anything else? Okay. So given everything we've talked about so far, what do you see as the next most important step you need to take? And when are you going to take it, and what's going to try to get in your way, and when can I follow up with you? And sometimes this conversation can go fairly quickly. It can go, it might be a half-hour conversation. But with my direct reports, I schedule a good hour for this conversation at least once a quarter, so that I am never surprised that there's something that they're working on or dealing with or struggling with or excited about that I'm not aware of. So I've learned that I have, yes, I can have my own agenda and certain things I want to cover, but from time to time, if I want a really engaged employee, someone who feels absolutely included and therefore has got plenty of execution muscle to make things happen, I need to have this mineral rights conversation. The third factor is transparency. The simplest definition of a fierce conversation is one in which we come out from behind ourselves into our conversations and make them real. I think everyone wants to have real conversations, but it makes us nervous because we don't always know how. And yet, if a problem exists, it exists whether we talk about it or not. I honestly think that this lack of transparency is one of the key reasons why the economy tanked years ago, and we're still somewhat in recovery, and I hope that we never go there again. But for some reason, human beings are very, very afraid of talking about what's really going on, ground truth, as opposed to the official truth. And yet, Carl Jung nailed it when he said, what we do not make conscious emerges later as fate. So, no plan survives its collision with reality. And reality has a habit of changing, which can complicate our brilliant plans about how things were going to go. So we need to frequently, as a team, get together and say, okay, what has changed since last we crafted this brilliant plan? What are we learning? What are our clients telling us? What is our network out there informing us about what's happening currently and projected to happen that we need to pay attention to. Because if you remember, going back to that first idea that, our companies, our careers, our relationships, and our lives succeed or fail gradually, then suddenly, one conversation at a time. We want to stay awake at gradually, all throughout gradually, so that we don't arrive at a negative suddenly, wondering what the heck just happened. We need to stop pretending if there are issues that we need to talk about. And this also includes one-on-one. The very first chapter in Fierce Leadership, a bold alternative to the worst best practices of leadership today, is on 360 anonymous feedback. I think that the 360 part is fabulous. The anonymous part is a problem. And I love this quote from Kevin Kelly, editor of Wired magazine. In every system I have seen, where anonymity becomes common, the system fails. Anonymity is like a rare earth metal, a necessary ingredient in keeping a cell alive, but the amount needed is a mere hard-to-measure trace. If anonymity is present in any significant quantity, it will poison the system. Like all toxins, anonymity should be kept as close to zero as possible. So why is it that so often we've got this annual 360 anonymous feedback thing for everybody that they really hate? And why do they hate it? Well, look at the definition of anonymous. Not identified by name, of unknown name, an anonymous phone call, for example, or having no outstanding individual or unusual features, unremarkable or impersonal, such as a faceless anonymous group, or used in names of support groups for addicts of a substance or behavior to indicate the confidentiality maintained among members of the group, like Alcoholics Anonymous or Debtors Anonymous. And I just want you to think about this. In what universe would anonymous feedback, anonymous anything, be considered a best practice? No one I know wishes to be unremarkable, impersonal, faceless, or unknown, and it would be very difficult to argue that anonymity enriches relationships or strengthens connections with others. The fact is, anonymous feedback rarely creates real or lasting impetus for change, which is crazy because the whole idea is to encourage professional growth. But there are problems. Anonymous feedback doesn't tell us what we really need to know because it's anonymous. And most people don't provide specific examples to support their evaluations because that might help the recipient guess who wrote them, and Lord help us if that should happen. So we avoid specifics and instead use sanitized phrases and a score of some sort, all of which tells the recipient very little about how to improve his or her performance. So all these conversations meant to create impetus for change fail because we don't know how to deliver the message without the load or how to praise people in such a way that they can tell we really mean it. It's one of the reasons why one of the most in-demand conversational models that we teach is how to confront. When you have someone who does have a behavior and attitude, performance issues that are not working, how do you have that conversation and actually create impetus for change while enriching the relationship rather than setting it back on its feet? And we really need to do that because anonymous feedback, it's one of the things that contributes to low employee engagement scores. The formal language of feedback is uninspiring and demotivating. Does the word satisfactory capture anything specific that we could feel good about? Would it inspire us to work harder, do better? How about meets expectations? Even exceeds expectations. So this colorless language of anonymous feedback with its numbers and ratings and boxes to check is soul-killing. There's no life, no joy, no intimacy, no connection, no humanity that enriches relationships. It is a missed opportunity to connect with people, a missed opportunity to be acknowledged as the individuals we are. So you can tell that I feel fairly strongly about that. I love the first stanza of a poem by William Stafford. If you don't know the kind of person I am, and I don't know the kind of person you are, a pattern others made may prevail in the world, and following the wrong God home, we may miss our star. So we have to talk with one another in a way where we express who we are and that we are genuinely interested in understanding who the other person is. And the final factor is you. I remember years and years ago, I consulted the I Ching one morning when I had an important issue on my mind, and I read this in a very real sense. The progress of the world depends on your progress as an individual now. And I remember thinking to myself, holy smokes, that's a little heavy. But then I got to thinking about it, and I realized that it's true. You know, so often we look outside ourselves because we want things to happen because of what other people do. And sometimes in a session or in a talk with people, folks will say, gosh, you know, I'd give anything if we had a culture like this, where these are the kinds of meetings that we held and these are the kinds of conversations that we had. That would be extraordinary if we really could be this transparent, this open and honest with one another, but, you know, that would not go over in my culture. And so what I always say is, please understand, you are the culture. Let me say it in a different way. You are the culture. And finally, you are the culture. Every single time you or I step into a room, pick up a phone, send an email, we are modeling communication style and behavior that either adds to a healthy culture and sustains and enriches a healthy culture or detracts from it. There's no way around it. If you're waiting for somebody else to model it so that you then have permission to do it too, you're missing the boat. And you're certainly not being the best you could be. So to close, there are a few suggestions. One is build execution muscle by engaging and including people every day. And this is a practice. Accept it as a practice and practice it. Second, strive to connect with your colleagues and your customers at a deep level. Start asking questions and listen and listen and listen for not only what they're saying, but what they're feeling, and inquire about that. Talk with people versus to them. Give face-to-face feedback versus anonymous feedback. And take all of that one conversation at a time. Additionally, sometimes you need to stay awake and locate your body parts. It can take courage to speak what is true for you. And yet, if you don't, your organization will suffer, and so will you, because you're playing a small game. Second, show up as yourself, always, unless, of course, you're a jerk. And if you are, we'll point it out to you and ask you to make some changes. Keep describing reality from your perspective without laying blame, and you'll be fine. It's when you start laying blame that you get in trouble. And champion the common good over narrow self-interest. This isn't about you. I know that you think it is, but as long as you make your world all about you and mostly about you, you're really stunting not only your own growth, but that of your organization. And make toxic employees available to industry. They're dangerous. And if you've tried everything you can to shift someone's behavior or attitude and you haven't been able to do that, let them go, cut them loose, pay them to go work for your competition. So in summary, just some questions to prompt some conversations for you. Who deserves your praise? Who deserves your apology? Whose perspective would be valuable at your next meeting? How connected are you to the people who are central to your success and happiness? And finally, what are you waiting for? Because while no single conversation is guaranteed to change the trajectory of a career, a company, a relationship, or a life, any single conversation can. So thank you, and I am very happy to respond to questions or comments from listeners.
Thank you so much, Susan, for sharing your thoughts and your perspectives on doing employee engagement. I think you've given us all a lot to think about, and the opportunity to take some of those things into our own hands in our own organization. So I want to thank you for that. And we have had some questions come in through the question and answer interface, so I'd like to get to as many of those as we can in the time we have remaining. HCI members, if you haven't yet submitted your question, I encourage you to do so now. You can do that a couple of ways. One, you can enter your question in the chat box. Just attach your name in parentheses so that we know who's asking the question. We can get you an answer. You can also tweet questions in with the hashtag HCI chat, and we will ask Susan those as well. So to get us started off, Susan, with our first question here, and this may be a difficult one to answer, but it's something that you kind of mentioned throughout your presentation, and starting with the beach ball conversation concept. You mentioned the dotted line person who says they don't have anything to add, or they're just agreeing, or they're just kind of staying quiet. What are some best practices for really working on those people, asking for their contributions, and what are some ways to know when it's probably all for naught?
That's a great question, and I'm really glad it got asked. So sometimes the people who end up having the best ideas are the ones who are not interested in taking a lot of airtime. They can sit very quietly because they're absorbing, they're synthesizing, and we make a big mistake if we don't ask them, what their thoughts are. So in the meeting itself, when you ask the person, if they do say, I don't have anything to add, do exactly what I suggested, say, well, what would you add if you did have something to add? And let them sit there and squirm. If people say, well, that might be very uncomfortable, heck yes, it will be uncomfortable, and we teach people how to behave. We teach people how to treat us. We teach people how to behave, and in a beach ball meeting, you need to get the message across very clearly, and the very first one you have is, nobody gets to hide out in this meeting. So if this person really refuses or persists in not adding to the meetings, then I would take them aside and speak to them one-to-one, and I would just put it to them this way. I would say, I would not have invited you to this meeting if I did not think you had something to add, and if I did not value your perspective. If you continue to refuse to add anything or to share any thoughts or to fully participate, then tell me why I need you, because I'm not getting it. I mean, you're just taking up room in the room. You're just taking up space in the room. You're not adding anything to the conversation. So what's going on? And just find out what's going on. But I think we just have to call it like it is and say, we do not need somebody attending meetings who has absolutely nothing to contribute, nothing to add, not an original thought in their head ever if their life depended on it. And who knows where that conversation will take you when you say, what's up with this? And why do I need you if you never have anything to add to these meetings? And some people will say, well, I'm shy, or I'm this or that. I say, well, okay, get over it. or should I just simply stop inviting you to the meetings? I mean, I'm shy too. I am a card-carrying introvert. And if I get invited to a meeting where some big issues are going to be discussed, at one of my clients' companies or something, I am paying such attention because I want to be able to contribute something. So, being shy or having it being a cultural issue or whatever, I'm sorry, but I'm not buying that. You're here, you're in a meeting, I have said I want to hear from you, and I mean that I want to hear from you. And so if this is not something you are willing to do, then I'm no longer going to invite you because you are not earning a place at the table. That may sound very harsh, and that's okay with me because we get what we expect, and if we expect someone to be quiet all the time and keep tolerating it, we're just going to get more and more and more. And I've not yet seen a spontaneous conversion of somebody's behavior. It does require a conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Susan. And this is kind of a follow-up question along those same lines from Janelle. She asks, do you have any suggestions for engaging employees who maybe aren't speaking up because they are afraid of repercussions?
Yeah, and there may well be reasons for them to be afraid of repercussions. If there have been repercussions, then who could blame them? It can be very scary. And so that's where you have to say, I'd like you to speak up, even in spite of your very natural fear of repercussions, because I'm here to tell you there will not be any repercussions in this meeting. I genuinely want you to push back against my ideas. If I'm saying I think this is a brilliant idea and you think it's the worst idea you ever heard, your value is in telling me about your concerns. It's not in agreeing with me. And so if there have been repercussions, and there often are, we turn our backs to the people, we don't invite them again, they do lose that place at the table, not because they didn't say anything, but because they said something that didn't agree with our brilliant ideas, then shame on us. And we have to fess up to that and say, I recognize there have been repercussions in the past, and that was wrong, and I apologize, and I intend to fix it. So, this is your opportunity to test me and everybody else here in the room to really go ahead and disclose what you're really thinking and feeling so that it expands the thinking for all of us.
Great. Thank you, Susan. And I'm going to dive right into our next question here. It's on a little bit of a different topic. This one's from Jean. Can you talk a little bit about employee satisfaction surveys? I know those are one ways that companies kind of use to measure engagement. And can you talk about also about how anonymity factors into those surveys and how those can be used?
Yeah, we conduct employee satisfaction surveys. They are not anonymous. Everyone here, and we're a small organization. We have 30 people that are here in the office every day. But everyone knows anonymity is not the way of life here. So people sign their surveys, and it really helps us in so many ways. To know how people really feel, and they know there won't be repercussions, except actually good ones, because we're going to say, if we see that people are bringing up the similar issue over and over again, we're going to see this is an issue here in the company and we need to resolve this. For example, we didn't have a 401k. Now we have a 401k. There's some things that we have done because of employee input, and we just learned again that we're on the best place to work list. I don't know how many years in a row this has been, and that's because of these, two things really. Certainly the surveys, which give us a lot of input on so many different aspects of what it's like to work here, but also on our daily interactions, one-to-ones that people have with their managers. We don't have a once or twice a year formal performance review that then replaces every other conversation. We stay current with one another all the time. So I'm all for the surveys. I don't think in an organization that's used to anonymity, I don't think that you can immediately start out by saying these aren't going to be anonymous. You have to sign your name, because a lot of people wouldn't, because they'd be afraid of repercussions. But what they are going to be looking for is, are you going to do anything based on what the surveys reveal? And that's where you have to say, thank you, everyone, for this input. We clearly have work to do in this area. And I would love to form a committee of people who can go to work on this and come up with some suggestions for what we need to do differently. And form that committee and let them come and tell you and make recommendations. So, if the same stuff keeps coming up year over year and we're not doing anything about it, then shame on us. And then eventually you can, especially if you give them training, whether it's fierce or some training that teaches them how to have these completely honest conversations that actually enrich relationships no matter what gets said, then, they'll be much more willing to sign their name to surveys in the future.
Great, thank you. And this question also kind of builds on that idea, especially in large organizations where maybe people feel more anonymous or they value being more anonymous. What are some other ways to measure engagement outside of a survey that maybe companies can use more often than, once or twice a year when they have everybody fill out a giant survey?
Well, I don't think you should be filling out more than one survey a year. I mean, I think the way we know somebody is engaged is in their demeanor, in the way they participate or don't participate. I remember reading years ago a book by Studs Terkel called Working, and he talked about a young woman named Nora who was just brilliant, who was being recruited by so many big companies out of college. She chose the one, she went to work for it, she was so excited to bring everything that she was and everything that she had to the table, and she discovered very quickly that everything that she had to bring and everything that she was not welcomed because it would wreck the curve for a lot of other people. And she said that within 3 months of working there, she had absented her spirit from her work. And I'll never forget that phrase. It kind of broke my heart. And I think we should be able, a company that has tens of thousands of employees, those employees are broken into teams. And somebody manages that team, and somebody looks after that team, and somebody should be paying attention to how are the individuals showing up. I mean, what's the look on their face? What's their body language? What's their posture when they walk in the door? When I ask them a question, how do they respond? Do we have good eye contact? Are we having meaningful conversations? Is there excitement here? I mean, sometimes you cannot measure by numbers and surveys what's really going on with someone. And then if you have, if anybody that that reports to you, you should have, from time to time, this mineral rights conversation, which will tell you everything you ever needed to know about the level of engagement of this individual. And will also connect you to this individual. It should be very transparent. It should be very meaningful conversation. So, no, the tool is the conversations that you're having with people in your organization. And it's the one, we keep wanting for there to be some other survey or some other thing that we can do besides having a conversation, and I'm not seeing it.
Thank you. That's a great way to look at it, so I appreciate that. Building on that, Susan, what would you say is the most powerful way to engage an employee who might be closed off or skeptical that the company or their manager really has their best interests at heart? And this question is from Marcel. What's the best mineral rights question to allow them to really open up?
Well, mineral rights begins by asking them what they want to talk about. And so, if they don't put that on the table, if they don't put that issue on the table, then you're going to want to circle back and bring it up yourself. But if you know that it's an issue, then the thing to do, nobody comes to me to talk about an issue with someone else in the company unless and until they have actually done their level best to have that conversation with the individual involved. If you haven't talked with them yourself, then don't come to me. And people need to learn how to have that conversation. So that's why our trainings are so full. So if people don't know how to have that conversation, they need to come to it. But I remember once somebody saying to me, "I'm unhappy in my marriage, and I don't know. I need to talk with my wife, but I don't know what to say. What should I say?" And I said, "How about saying I'm unhappy in our marriage?" And he was like, "What?" It's like, well, or you could say, "What do you want for dinner?" But I don't think that's going to get you where you want to go. And why are we so hesitant to say, "Look, it seems like you're concerned about your professional development plan. Is that right? If so, tell me what your thoughts are. Tell me what concerns you," and just put it out there and ask it. But ideally, they'll bring it up. And then you just ask, in both of my books, mineral rights is in there. The whole outline for that conversation is in there. And there are 7 questions that you ask in order, and each one allows probing within that question. But if you aren't aware of it, either come to a training or read up on it, but go and practice it. It's the most powerful conversation there is. So there's not a question, there's a whole series of questions.
Great, thank you. And I think we have time for just one last question here. So I'm going to ask this last question from Belinda. And this kind of goes back to the beach ball conversations and the meetings and having a place at the table that you discussed early on in the presentation. Belinda asks, what do you suggest for meeting coordinators to do when there is a leader or a participant that is really bent on dominating the conversation?
Well, somebody has to go bell that cat. And, so in our training, we always explain, if you are the leader and you're putting the topic on the table, this opening statement that you will make, where you're talking about here's the issue, here's why it's important, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, ends with, now I want your input. Okay, that is pretty much the last thing that should be coming out of your mouth, except to say things like, thank you, say more about that, or to ask questions about it. You don't go back in. So the leaders have to be coached. And anybody who's going to hold a beach ball conversation has to understand that they get the opening statement, and after that, their role is to probe, ask. And sometimes I will say, when I've been helping a client learn how to have these conversations, at the beginning of a meeting, I'll say, those of you who are accustomed to taking a lot of airtime, I need for you to take very little airtime. I want you to say what you want to say and say that clearly and only. And those of you who usually don't say much at all, you will need to step up to the table, and if you don't volunteer, you will be asked what your thoughts are. Because the goal of this meeting is to hear from every single person who's at the table. And in order to do that, we've got to allow time for everyone to talk it through so that whoever is going to make the decision will make it with all of the valid information. So we just have to say it. We have to say to someone, stop talking. I mean, one leader even asked me to put a little microphone in his ear and talk into it behind my cupped hand so that I would be saying, okay, shut up. Time to shut up. Stop talking. Sit down. Whatever. And I said, no, you don't need that. You know what you need to do. But I'll just look at me and I'll motion as if I'm, stopping a game or something, and that'll be your signal.
Thank you, Susan. I think in your material today, you've shared a lot of good practices for all of us, not only in the workplace, but also just in our personal lives as well, about having the real conversations and digging a little deeper. So I want to thank you for that. We have come to the end of the hour, so we are going to wrap up this webcast for today. If you would like to, HCI members, you can head over to HCI's social media channels, LinkedIn discussion page, or Twitter with the hashtag HCI chat, and read a little more and talk about these ideas a little bit more if you'd like. I do want to say one last thank you again to Susan Scott for being with us today and for sharing her expertise, and also to everyone at Fierce for making this webcast possible. We couldn't have done it without you, so thank you. And of course, to all of our HCI members, sure thing. To all of our HCI members, we do appreciate you taking the time out of your day today to spend with us, and we hope you enjoyed it and look forward to seeing all of you on another webcast soon. Thanks again, and have a great day.